back, my friend Vonda Skelton. But in today's world, the stories are not being told.
Faith and pass it on. Share the gospel clear and strong. Stand for, claim your heritage of truth.
Welcome to Heritage of Truth. Today I welcome back my friend Vonda Skelton. Welcome, Vonda.
Thank you. I am so glad to be back with you today. I had so much fun the last time.
Yeah, Vonda actually has the honor of being our very first guest ever.
Really? I
Yes.
had forgotten that, but that's
Yes,
right.
you were. You
Yes.
were. So I'm really glad to have you back.
You've just grown such a great ministry and had
Oh,
such
thank you.
wonderful guests on the show, so I'm really super duper honored to be back. Thank you.
Now, you have been doing some new things since then. You have something called the Christian Communicators. Why don't you tell us what that is, and then tell us a little bit more about why it's so important.
Okay, the Christian Communicators Conference, the Lord, this is one of those times, when the Lord just has to bonk you in the head to get you to do something. I can look back on my life and the key moments in my life when He wanted to do something. In both instances, I did not want to. And that was when, with my marriage testimony, He wanted me to share that with the women of my church, and I promptly told Him I wouldn't. I never had spoken to women. I was a stage person, on stage with theater, and that wasn't the issue. It was I didn't want women to know my story. And when I finally agreed to do it, I went, did that weekend retreat, and came home knowing what I was created for. And the same thing with this. I kept telling Him, no, I couldn't do this, or I wasn't going to do this, or whatever. And again, those are the two biggest turning points in my life as far as ministry and what He had for me to do. So we need to listen. And hopefully other women aren't as hard-headed as I was about it. But the story, that was the key, is that I was afraid to tell my story. And the truth is that we all have scars. We all have things that we're ashamed of or afraid of or wish we had done differently. But we learned from them and we grew, and God redeemed us. And through that, we are able, if we're willing, to affect other people, if we're willing to share it. Share, not to give Satan glory, but we can, through that, share the hope and the grace and the mercy and the healing that we can get through a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so my motto for my personal ministry is I'm thankful God can take my messes and use them for His glory. So we talk about story a lot at Christian Communicators. I never had this on my horizon, never, ever, ever thought I would be doing this. But for years, as you know, I've been a speaker and a writer. And several years ago, God just blessed the socks off my speaking ministry in a way that I never ever even envisioned. And I was speaking 50 to 60 times a year, and all the time, over and over and over, people would be saying, can you teach me how to do what you're doing? And I wanted to in my heart, but I could barely keep my own head above water, and it just wouldn't be fair, to them to go into a mentor relationship. So I would refer them to other areas and just put their name in a file, and that just would happen over and over and over. And finally, I realized God was telling me that I needed to start a speaker's training for Christian women. And He, without me doing anything other than telling Him, I can't do it because of this, this, and this, and there are three things, He brought Himself every piece of that puzzle to the point that I had to accept the fact that this was His, and that He wanted this. And that was in 2010 that I finally accepted the fact that I was supposed to do it. And this year is our 5th our sixth conference that we will be doing in August at the Billy Graham Training Center at the Cove. And we've added an advanced conference, and we train Christian women how to develop a speaking ministry. Not that it has to be some big ministry, many do, but some of them just need to want to learn how to give their testimony, how to talk about the Lord or teach well, and others are really out there just doing lots of stuff. We only take 30 women, and we go up to the Billy Graham Training Center, and we have an intimate, special, hands-on, personal 5 days of training. It's just a beautiful place and a great way for Christian women to come together and learn how to tell their stories in a way that they can point people to Christ, point people to biblical raising of their children, whatever their ministry and their passion is. They can learn how to do that. I often think, what if I had not been obedient to that one call? That would have never led to the books. It would have never led to the writing and the speaking and the opportunity to encourage other women and train other women in how to do the same thing.
So why is it so important for women to tell their stories?
Oh, all you have to do is look at the scripture. I love the story of the woman at the well because, first of all, it says that Jesus was compelled to go there. So he knew he had an appointment with her. And he came at a time when he shouldn't have been there. I mean, that was the time that all the undesirable women of the room of the town would come. And she, as we know, was an adulteress. She had had 5 or 6 husbands, and the man she was living with was not her husband. But she had an encounter with Jesus. And I love what it says. It says, after she met Jesus, it says that she ran back to her town. And I love the fact that so many times we think, oh, I've got to study the Greek and the Hebrew, and I've got to go to seminary, I've got to learn my Bible. No, she went back to her town, and she said, let me tell you about a man. And what she was saying is, let me tell you my story of what this man did. And because of her, the scriptures tell us that many in her town were saved. Why would they believe her? It was because she could tell her story of what God did for her. And nobody can argue with your own story.
Yeah, your own experience.
Your own
experience.
They
can't.
Jesus used story.
He sure did.
To get across his message, and we can too.
We were talking earlier off camera about the power of story and how important it is in families. Why don't you tell a little bit about how story entered into your family time?
Oh, well, I remember being a little kid, and on Sunday afternoons we would go to my grandma's house. She had one of those big, in South Carolina, one of those big southern porches and a swing. And we would sit out there in the swing, and she would tell us stories. My mother's mother and my dad's mother would tell us stories about my parents when they were growing up, and stories of when they got in trouble, and funny stories or things they did wrong or things they misunderstood. You know how kids confuse things. And those were great stories. I could see my daddy as a little boy, and I could see my mom doing some of the same things I did. And now there's not this continuation of story. And when I was a child, we actually heard stories from even generations before, because at that time, generation after generation after generation would tell stories from their history, from their past, from their ancestors. And so I would hear stories from generations before my dad even. But in today's world, the stories are not being told. Children are growing up and they're not hearing about their parents' childhood. Those stories are being stopped. And if we don't write them, or if we don't share them, if we don't get on the stage and tell them, they die. I said something one day recently about something about technology, and I can't even remember now what it was. And my granddaughter, who is 9, well, why didn't you, I don't remember, why didn't you just email them or something? And I'm like, email? We didn't have email. We had a 4-party line where you listen in on other people's conversations when you were a kid. But she had no concept that we didn't have computers, we didn't have email, we didn't have texting and
cell phones
and any of that. And I realized, oh my goodness, I need to get back to telling the stories. Mm-hmm. So that was a recent time that I was prodded again to continue to do that. Yeah. And those stories can be powerful, not only if they have a spiritual perspective, but also they can be powerful in building families, mm-hmm. building in family relationships, and passing on those biblical truths that we learn through life and through our ancestors, the passing down of the messages mm-hmm. that we're supposed to share.
I remember times when my brothers and sisters just getting together, reminiscing about our childhood, mm-hmm. and my daughter loved listening to that, and mm-hmm. now my grandchildren love listening to stories like that.
Story is so powerful. It's powerful to you and me as writers, mm-hmm. and that we can either learn what we've learned and hold it close to ourselves and take it to heaven with us, or we can learn what we've learned, write it out, speak it out, let it go out to the world mm-hmm. and change lives for Christ.
That's right.
When we have these scars that they're on us, that we can keep them as scars, or we can let them be free and use them for His glory, and He will.
He will. It's interesting when you use something like that for His glory, it's like He heals it a little more. Doesn't it seem that way?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The thing that I was so embarrassed about and so ashamed of, and I didn't want my church friends to know, is the very thing that launched all of this.
Mm-hmm. I think it's really important to tell stories.
Yeah, and if we don't, they die.
They do.
That is just a powerful truth. And when I began to realize that, I really began to seek ways to share the stories. And one of the ways I did was through my Bitsy books.
Yes. Why don't you tell people about that?
Oh, well, it was so much fun. When I wrote the first Bitsy book, I wrote it specifically about my family, but it was, different names and all this, but a lot of our family traditions were in there. Specific scenes from my childhood were mm-hmm. in there. I actually made a list of every memory I had as a child. Mm. Funny ones, sad ones, whatever. I just made that list, and I created this family that was basically my family. Mm. The personality of my parents were the personality of the parents in the book. And the characters, the children were, I was Bitsy, and it was my brothers and sisters. And so when you read the Bitsy books, you see the personality of everyone. But the really fun thing is when I would come to a point, and you know how intuitively, okay, I need something funny here. So I would go to my list, and I'd go down the list. Oh, I remember when that happened. That was so funny. So I would take that from the list mm-hmm. and plug it into the story and let it happen to my characters. I wrote that book in the summer of '93.
Yes.
All I did was made, run off copies, mimeographs, or no, it wasn't mimeographed. It was on a copy machine, but I had to go to a print shop. You didn't have home printers or anything like that. And I made copies of that, put it in a 3-ring binder, and gave a copy to my parents mm-hmm. and a copy to each of my brothers and sisters. My family just loved it. They loved reading about themselves, even though they were different names. And they remembered the stories that I included in there. Well, my dad, you would have thought I was a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was so proud. He would introduce me to his friends. He'd say, "This is Vonda, my daughter. She's a writer." And he just got so much joy. He got joy out of reading it, joy out of remembering our stories. He was so proud that I had done that. Not only that I had written the book, but that I had carried on, told stories from our childhood and put it in a contemporary book. That was in Christmas of '93. My dad died in May of '94.
Oh my goodness.
And I have thought so many times, what if I had not written that book? he got so much joy and so much just excitement and satisfaction of reading that book and seeing his family in there and calling me a writer. You know, he got so much joy out of that. And I often think, what if I had not written that book? What joy he would have missed out on, what joy we would have missed out on, but particularly for my dad. So I stuck to it and eventually had a publishable book, really publishable, because it takes a long time to learn how to write well.
Yes.
And ended up getting that book published and wrote 2 more books in the series, so it has 3 books in it. And in every one, it's stories from my childhood, and I just would take it and let it happen to those kids in that story. And so
that makes it really special.
Oh, it does. I can pick up that book and read it and just kind of chuckle, remembering the time my brother got his head caught in the porch rail.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Or the time.
So that really does happen, not just in movies.
No, I promise you, it really happened. And I used mayonnaise and butter smeared all over him to get him out. So, you know, we can laugh about that to this day. And yet, if I hadn't written it down, my grandchildren would have probably never heard about it. Their children will never hear about it. But yet, for generations to come, my family, my future generations can pick up and read about their family history.
And even though that's a really small thing, it doesn't have any great spiritual significance.
No.
It gives them a sense of connection with family.
Oh, it does.
And I think that's really important, especially in this day and age when families hardly do anything together.
Grandma's on the East Coast and the grandkids are on the West Coast, and it's somebody that you see every couple of years.
And they don't even half the time eat dinner together.
No.
So yeah, I think it's very important for families to start making time to have meals together, but also to spend time just sharing stories.
And then the other thing is that even now as adults, when I get together with my family, we'll start reminiscing about those times when we were kids. And of course the story, gets a little tweaked. No, that's not the way it happened. We've done that. It's so funny. We can laugh. We just laugh. And even though at times our family, like everybody else, is a dysfunctional family, and our family can have conflict just like everybody else, we're united.
Yeah.
Those memories and those stories will always unite us. Oh, there are some days that we could all beat each other up, but when we think about those funny times or those sad times or those good times or bad times, when we think about that is always a uniting moment. That we can walk away and know that we do love each other, even in the midst of conflict or whatever. Now, in the second book, I actually used my oldest daughter as another family that were friends with Bitsy's family. So now we've got generations, but in the book it wasn't generations. And so the children in there were named after my grandchildren.
How fun.
And the mother and dad are my daughter and her husband. And then in the third book, the same thing. So the first book was Bitsy at Tybee Island, Bitsy and the Mystery at Tybee Island, and that was my personal family. Then Bitsy and the Mystery at Amelia Island, which is Bitsy's family, and then my oldest daughter and her family. And then Bitsy and the Mystery at Hilton Head Island. And here it's the Bitsy's family, and then my youngest daughter and her family. So it's so much fun for these kids to see themselves. As a matter of fact, my oldest granddaughter, when the book came out for Amelia Island, when I went to my first book signing on Amelia Island, she sat at the table with me. I would autograph it, and she would autograph it.
How fun. How fun. Well, I mean, that's a connection, a family connection that people don't have to write a book for that.
They don't.
All they have to do is tell their stories.
But you know what? If you don't tell your stories of what God has done in your life, how He's healed you, how you came out of a difficult time, or your stories of just growing up as a child, If you don't tell those stories, they die with you.
That's right.
They die with you. If you tell them, if you write them down, or if you just tell them to the next generation, they then have those stories forever that they can then
And they
pass
love
on.
hearing them.
Exactly.
Things, ways we messed up, and they love it. And they want to hear it over and over and over.
The same story over and over and over.
And we like telling them over
We
and
do.
over.
We do.
And this is one way that families can start bonding again.
Yes.
Through story.
Exactly.
So where can people find you online?
Well, I have a website, VondaSkelton.com. Not skeleton. So many times I get that, but VondaSkelton.com.
So it's SKELTON.
Yes, no extra E. And then ChristianCommunicators.com is the speaker's training.
Okay.
And I would just love to meet your listeners.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Vonda, for joining us on
Thank
Heritage
you.
of Truth. I'm so excited that I
thank
got to
you.
do this with you. Well, thank you, Vonda.
Thank you.
Share the